Evelyn Carter had always found peace among the rolling fields and sun-drenched meadows of Hayes Ranch. The scent of fresh hay, the gentle whinnying of horses, and the warmth of sunlight on her face were the only comforts she had in a world that otherwise treated her unkindly. Since her mother's passing, her life had been reduced to servitude beneath the iron will of Martha Carter, her cold, greedy stepmother, and the silent shadow of her weak-willed father, Jacob. They ruled her world with threats, debts, and guilt, tightening their grip on her fragile hope with every passing day. Evelyn's only escape was in the small kindnesses she gave to others. She worked hard tending to the animals, often losing herself in their innocence. At night, she would quietly gather what little she could, food, clothes, small change, and give it to the homeless women and beggars near the outskirts of town. It was her secret rebellion against a world that had caged her spirit. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, a gathering was called at the Grand Ranch House. The workers assembled with murmurs of curiosity. Evelyn stood quietly at the back, dirt smudging her apron, her hair loosely tied, while the towering figure of Logan Hayes, the young, powerful owner of the ranch, addressed them. Logan was everything Evelyn wasn't: confident, handsome, wealthy beyond measure. His piercing blue eyes scanned the crowd as he announced, in a tone colder than the wind that swept the fields, "For business reasons, I require a wife, a marriage of convenience, nothing more. The woman chosen will be provided for, but she must obey." The words settled heavily in the air, shocking everyone. Evelyn felt a chill crawl up her spine, but it wasn't until later that night that her world truly shattered. Back at their small, worn-down home on the ranch's edge, Martha's eyes gleamed with cruel excitement. "This is our chance," she hissed to Jacob, whose hunched shoulders spoke of a man too broken to object. Evelyn looked between them, a cold dread spreading in her chest. "You'll marry Logan Hayes," Martha declared, her voice like a whip crack. "He needs a wife, and we need his money. Your father's debts will ruin us if you don't." "No, no, I can't," Evelyn stammered, heart pounding. The thought of marrying a man she barely knew, a man who viewed marriage as a business deal, was suffocating. But her father, wringing his hands, wouldn't meet her gaze. "Evelyn, it's the only way," he whispered hoarsely. "The bank, the debts. I'm sorry." Tears burned in Evelyn's eyes, not just from betrayal, but from a lifetime of being a pawn in their selfish games. She wanted to scream, to run, but where would she go? She thought of the helpless women she helped, of the cold nights and empty bellies she'd witnessed. If she could spare her father, weak as he was, from ruin, if she could save their small home from being taken, perhaps it was worth it. After a long, silent moment, Evelyn straightened her back, wiping away the tears before they fell. "I'll do it," she said softly, her voice steady though her heart cracked. "I'll marry Logan Hayes." Martha smirked, satisfied, while Jacob gave a broken sigh. Evelyn turned her face away, hiding the pain she could no longer bear to show. The stars outside blinked indifferently as another piece of her freedom was stolen. Little did she know, this unwanted proposal would lead her into a storm far greater than she imagined, and it would begin with a wedding that lacked love, but carried the weight of secrets neither she nor Logan could foresee. The wedding came swiftly, like a storm that no one had prepared for. The small, cold ceremony was held in the grand drawing room of the Hayes Ranch Manor, a place more accustomed to hosting business meetings than sacred vows. There were no flowers, no music, no family gathered in joy. Just a judge, a pair of signatures, and two people bound by duty rather than love. Evelyn stood in a simple, pale dress, not white, but a faded cream, that Martha had hastily forced upon her. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the small, withering bouquet, her heart aching beneath the thin fabric. She glanced at Logan Hayes, standing beside her, tall and immaculately dressed in a tailored suit. His face betrayed no emotion, his icy blue eyes never once meeting hers. When asked if he would take Evelyn as his wife, Logan's voice was flat, devoid of warmth. "I do," he said, as though signing a contract. And when it was Evelyn's turn, she forced the words out past the lump in her throat. "I do." The kiss was a mere brush of air, an obligation. No one clapped, no one smiled. Martha grinned in triumph, her greedy eyes already calculating her gains, while Jacob stood silently, his face a portrait of shame. After the brief, hollow ceremony, Logan barely spoke to Evelyn. "You will continue your duties as before," he said curtly, walking ahead of her, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "I expect no disruptions to my work or my routine. This marriage changes nothing." Evelyn nodded, swallowing the pain. She knew better than to expect tenderness. She returned to the stables, to the fields, to the animals she loved, the only souls that had never judged or used her. The ranch hands watched her curiously, pity flickering in a few of their eyes, but none dared to speak of the marriage. It was a secret best left buried beneath the dust of the ranch. But Evelyn's life outside the ranch remained unchanged. At dusk, after her chores were done, she continued her secret kindness. Beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the property, she would leave bundles of food, second-hand clothes, and whatever small coins she could spare for the homeless women and beggars who waited in the shadows. Among them was Mrs. Whitmore, a frail elderly widow with hair like spun silver and eyes that once gleamed with life. Evelyn always saved the warmest bread and thickest blankets for her. "You're an angel, child," Mrs. Whitmore would whisper with a grateful smile, her voice cracked with age. "No one else cares but you." These stolen moments of compassion were Evelyn's lifeline, a small rebellion against the coldness of her new world. She gave freely, even though 80% of her small salary disappeared into Martha's greedy hands. What little she kept went to those who needed it more. As the days passed, Logan remained a distant figure, more a landlord than a husband. He spoke to Evelyn only when necessary, his tone businesslike, his gaze always elsewhere. Evelyn wondered if he even remembered he was married, or if she was just another item crossed off his to-do list. Yet unknown to her, things were beginning to shift in quiet, hidden ways. Logan had noticed her slipping away in the evenings, the way she disappeared into the gathering dusk with small parcels in hand. Curiosity, and something else he didn't yet name, stirred in his heart. He would soon follow her, and what he would witness beneath the old oak tree would crack the ice around his carefully guarded world. The days on Hayes Ranch blended into a monotonous rhythm, each one indistinguishable from the last. Evelyn continued her duties, grooming the horses, tending to the crops, and preparing meals for the ranch staff. Life under the looming shadow of her loveless marriage remained unchanged. Yet in the quiet corners of the ranch, in the stillness of night, something else was stirring. Logan Hayes, despite his coldness and emotional distance, found himself growing more attuned to Evelyn's movements. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, her quiet grace amidst the chaos of ranch life, or the sadness that seemed to follow her like a shadow. Her presence intrigued him, but he didn't understand it, nor did he want to. One evening, long after the ranch workers had retreated to their quarters, Logan found himself standing near the stables, watching as Evelyn tied her apron and walked out toward the fields. It was a subtle movement, almost instinctual, but Logan's sharp eyes didn't miss it. He had never seen her leave this late before. The curiosity gnawed at him like a persistent itch. Without thinking, he followed, keeping a safe distance as she walked beneath the glowing moonlight. The ranch was vast, the land stretching out like an endless sea of green. But Evelyn seemed to know exactly where she was going, toward the old oak tree at the far end of the property. Logan's heart skipped a beat when he realized where she was heading. He crouched behind a thick cluster of bushes, staying hidden in the darkness, watching her with a strange, unsettling intensity. Evelyn reached the tree and began to pull small bundles from her bag, gently placing them on the ground. Food, clothes, even a few coins. Logan's heart clenched as he realized she wasn't alone. Several figures, ragged and weathered, emerged from the shadows. Homeless women, beggars, and wanderers. They surrounded her with silent gratitude, their eyes wide with hope. One by one, they approached Evelyn, who smiled warmly and handed each of them something. Logan watched in stunned silence as Evelyn's hands moved with tenderness, offering more than just material goods. She gave them something that Logan hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine care, a compassion that reached beyond mere charity. There was no judgment in her eyes, no disgust at the rags or dirt that clung to the beggars. She saw them for who they were, human beings who had been forgotten by society. Evelyn paused to speak to an elderly woman with a frail frame, her voice soft and soothing as she wrapped a worn blanket around her shoulders. "Here, take this. Stay warm tonight," she whispered, her words full of empathy. "I'll come back tomorrow." Logan's chest tightened as he observed her from the shadows. There was something so pure about her kindness, something that struck at his very core. He had always prided himself on his ability to control his emotions, to keep people at arm's length. Yet seeing Evelyn in this light, seeing the way she gave so freely to those in need, stirred a part of him he had buried long ago. For a long moment, Logan remained hidden, watching in silence. The moonlight bathed Evelyn in a soft, ethereal glow, casting her as an angel in his eyes. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that she wasn't the woman he had married out of convenience. She wasn't a mere figure in his life, a pawn in his business dealings. Evelyn was something far more complex, someone with a heart full of selflessness, someone who had dreams and hopes that stretched beyond the cold walls of the ranch. His breath caught as he finally noticed the faint traces of exhaustion in her movements. She was giving so much, yet she had so little to keep for herself. She spent her days working herself into the ground and her nights helping those who couldn't repay her. Logan felt an unfamiliar pang of guilt. Was he any better? He had everything: wealth, power, security, and yet he had never given a fraction of what she had. As the last of the figures disappeared into the night, Evelyn slowly gathered her things, preparing to leave. Logan remained frozen, his thoughts swirling. For a moment, he almost stepped forward, his instinct to speak to her, to ask her about the life she lived behind closed doors. But he stayed silent, hidden in the shadows. He couldn't bring himself to intrude on her world, not yet. When she was gone, Logan lingered in the darkness, still haunted by the image of her kindness. He didn't know what he was feeling, didn't know why it felt so impossible to look at her the same way anymore. But one thing was certain: something had shifted, something had awakened within him that he couldn't ignore. Evelyn Carter, the woman he had married out of convenience, was far more than just his wife. She was a force of nature, a light in a world that had long been consumed by darkness, and he was going to need to understand that. The days following Logan's quiet observation of Evelyn were filled with a strange unease. It was as though something had shifted inside him, a subtle change that gnawed at his usually unwavering composure. Each time he passed her in the halls of the ranch or saw her tending to the horses, a part of him, one he had tried to ignore for years, wanted to know more. She was a mystery to him, a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. The more he thought about her late-night charity work, the more he saw her differently. She wasn't just the obedient wife in the cold, sterile marriage he had orchestrated. She was someone with depth, someone who gave so much of herself to people who would never repay her. And it was clear now: Evelyn wasn't like the women he'd known. She wasn't after money, power, or status. She had something more, something that had never been in his grasp. Despite his inner turmoil, Logan kept his distance. He couldn't let go of the walls he had built around himself, walls forged from years of ambition and loss. But he couldn't help it. He was drawn to her. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she cared for those in need, the way her face softened when she helped the elderly widow, Mrs. Whitmore. There was a light in her that Logan hadn't seen in anyone else, a warmth that made him want to change. It was one morning just after breakfast when Logan finally decided to break the silence. He approached Evelyn as she walked across the garden, a basket of fresh herbs in hand. She didn't notice him at first, too lost in her own thoughts, her footsteps slow and deliberate. "Evelyn!" Logan called out, his voice breaking through the stillness of the morning air. She turned, startled, her expression guarded. She had long since learned to keep her emotions in check around him, her heart closed off like a door with no key. She nodded curtly, her eyes already drifting to the ground, not wanting to engage in any unnecessary conversation. "Yes, Mr. Hayes?" There it was again, the coldness in her tone, the distance she kept between them. It stung more than Logan cared to admit, but he refused to let it deter him. He took a few steps forward, watching her carefully. "I've been thinking," he began, unsure of how to continue, "about what you do in your spare time." Evelyn froze, her back straightening, her shoulders tensing. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She had a feeling this conversation would be about the late-night excursions, the charity work she had kept hidden from him. She didn't want him to know about it. It was her one solace, her one escape from the life she had been forced into. "There's nothing to talk about," she replied quickly, her voice sharp. "I simply help when I can." Logan was silent for a moment, watching her carefully. He could see the walls she had erected around herself, the guarded look in her eyes. "I don't think it's just that, Evelyn," he said softly. "You give so much of yourself, more than I've ever seen from anyone. Why?" Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, and she felt a pang of frustration. She hadn't expected this. Why was he asking now? Why did he care? The man who had barely acknowledged her existence until now, the man who had married her as a mere transaction. Why was he suddenly showing interest in her heart, in her life? Her eyes narrowed and she set the basket of herbs down on a nearby stone bench. "It's nothing, really. Just the way I was raised," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't understand, Mr. Hayes. You don't need to." Logan's brow furrowed at the way she spoke, the sorrow that slipped into her words, the vulnerability she was desperately trying to hide. It was as though a window had cracked open, and he could see the fragile woman beneath the tough exterior. "I want to understand," he said quietly. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came out. For a long moment, they stood there in silence. The only sound the rustle of the wind through the trees. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension. Logan took a step closer, his gaze softening. "I want to know more about you, Evelyn. What drives you? What makes you you?" Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow. She couldn't understand why his words felt like a delicate thread, pulling at the knot in her chest. She didn't want to feel this way. She didn't want to care about what he thought of her, especially when he had never truly cared before. "This marriage is nothing but a business arrangement," she said, her voice low but firm. "I don't expect anything from you, and I'm sure you don't expect anything from me. So why are you asking all these questions?" Logan hesitated, then took a breath, steadying himself. "Maybe because I've realized I've been wrong about you. I've realized that what we've become, isn't how it should be. I want to change that, if you'll let me." Evelyn looked at him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but found none. The words he spoke were genuine, even though she was reluctant to believe them. "I don't trust easily, Mr. Hayes," she replied softly. "I don't believe in fairy tales. I'm not here to be part of some dream you're trying to build. I'm here because my father's debts forced me into this." Logan nodded, acknowledging her pain. "I understand. I'll never ask you to change your mind. But if you'll let me, I want to make things better. For both of us." Evelyn felt a flicker of hope, but she quickly squashed it. She couldn't afford to trust him, not when her heart had already been broken once. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Logan standing alone in the garden, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. But something had changed between them. The ice had cracked, just a little, and that tiny crack was all Logan needed to start something he hadn't expected, a journey toward healing, toward understanding, and maybe even toward love. The storm hit suddenly, a violent force of nature that raged across the ranch with no warning. Dark clouds rolled in, obscuring the sun, and the winds howled, knocking over trees and sending debris tumbling across the fields. It was the kind of storm that left little room for escape, forcing everyone to seek shelter where they could. Logan Hayes stood at the window of his office, his brow furrowed in concentration. The ranch was sprawling, and the storm's fury seemed to intensify by the minute. The wind screeched against the windows, rattling the frames, and Logan felt a twinge of unease. His mind raced with thoughts of the animals in the barns, the horses in their stables, and the cows out in the fields. There was too much at stake, too many lives at risk. Without a second thought, he pushed open the door to his office and stepped into the storm. The cold wind whipped through his hair, and the rain soaked his clothes almost instantly. But he didn't care. He knew what he had to do. But what he didn't expect was the sight that greeted him as he reached the barnyard. Evelyn was already out there, her figure barely visible in the darkness of the storm. She was running toward the animal pens, her eyes fixed on the barn where the animals had been corralled. Her long hair was plastered against her face, and her clothes were soaked, but she didn't seem to notice. She was moving with purpose, her eyes wide with determination. Logan's heart skipped a beat as he watched her. She wasn't running away from the storm. She was running straight into it. He followed her, his boots slipping on the wet ground, but he kept his eyes trained on her as she reached the barn. There, several of the animals were trapped inside, frightened and confused. The barn had sustained damage from the storm, and part of the roof had collapsed, trapping the animals inside the stables. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She rushed to the first animal, a frightened horse, and began to untangle the ropes that had gotten caught in the wreckage. She moved with a sense of urgency, her hands shaking, but her determination unshaken. Logan could see the fear in her eyes, but she never faltered. She was doing what she always did, putting others before herself. "Evelyn!" Logan shouted, running toward her. The storm's deafening roar made it hard to hear, but he could see her body tense, her head snapping around at the sound of her name. She froze for a moment, as if unsure whether she had heard him correctly, then turned to face him, her face pale, her clothes soaked. "What are you doing out here?" Logan shouted, reaching her side. "It's too dangerous. Get back inside." But Evelyn wasn't listening. She was focused on the horse, her hands gently working to untie the knot that had trapped the animal's legs. Her eyes were calm now, even in the chaos of the storm, her focus unbroken. "I can't just leave them," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "They need me." Logan watched in stunned silence as she worked, her hands deftly moving, her eyes never straying from the animal in front of her. The storm continued to rage, the wind pulling at their clothes, but Evelyn was undeterred. She wasn't afraid, at least not in the way Logan had expected. It was as though the danger, the chaos, was nothing compared to her need to save the helpless creatures around her. Something shifted in Logan then. The wall he had built around his heart, the one that had kept him from truly seeing Evelyn, cracked further. He had always seen her as just his wife, a woman trapped in a marriage that wasn't of her choosing. He had never truly understood her, had never taken the time to see the strength beneath the surface. But now, watching her risk everything for the sake of the animals, he felt a pull deep within him, a recognition that this woman, this beautiful, selfless woman, was someone extraordinary. As if sensing his gaze, Evelyn turned to him once more, her wet hair sticking to her face. She managed a strained smile, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes. "I'm almost done," she said, her voice steady despite the storm. "You don't need to help." Logan's heart tightened as he took a step closer, moving toward the wreckage with the intent to help. He couldn't just stand there and watch her. He had to do something. "No," he said firmly. "You're not doing this alone." Without another word, he bent down, helping her lift the beam that had fallen across the horse's legs. The effort was grueling, the debris heavy and unwieldy, but together they managed to clear it enough to free the animal. Evelyn didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyes met his for the briefest of moments, and in that fleeting exchange, something passed between them. A quiet acknowledgement, a flicker of something unspoken. When the horse was finally freed, Evelyn didn't take a moment to rest. She immediately moved to the next animal, a cow stuck in the corner of the barn, its leg pinned under the collapsed wood. Logan followed her, not asking questions, just moving with her, side by side, working together in the storm. It was as if nothing else mattered in that moment but the animals and each other. Hours later, the storm began to subside. The wind slowed, and the rain became little more than a drizzle. The animals were safe, each one freed and led to the pasture where they could find shelter. Evelyn and Logan stood in the barnyard, their clothes drenched, their bodies exhausted, but their hearts lighter. Logan turned to her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Thank you," he said quietly. I didn't know you were like this." Evelyn shrugged, her face flushed from the exertion in the rain. "It's just what I do," she said, her voice soft. "I can't just sit by and do nothing when others are suffering." Logan looked at her, his eyes no longer cold or indifferent. There was a warmth there now, a flicker of admiration, and maybe something more. Something he wasn't ready to name yet. But it was there, in the way he watched her, in the way she moved, in the way she gave of herself without hesitation. For the first time, Logan truly understood Evelyn. She wasn't just the woman he had married for business reasons. She wasn't just the farm girl who had been forced into a life she didn't want. She was a woman with a heart that overflowed with compassion, a woman who didn't let the world harden her soul. And as he stood beside her in the stillness after the storm, Logan realized something else too. A bond was beginning to form, fragile yet undeniable. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. The days after the storm were quieter, though the air was still thick with tension. Logan couldn't shake the image of Evelyn's determined face, drenched and yet unfazed, as she worked tirelessly to save the animals. It wasn't just her courage that had struck him. It was the sheer selflessness she embodied, the kind of strength that went unnoticed by most, but not by him. He had seen something that day, something he couldn't ignore. Logan's mind wandered back to the barnyard. He had watched Evelyn with a newfound respect, yet it wasn't just her bravery that haunted him. It was the look in her eyes, the quiet resolve that seemed to stem from a place deeper than duty. And that's when it hit him. Evelyn wasn't just the farm girl he had married out of convenience. She was more than that, much more. But who was she really? What made her the woman he had married, the woman he now found himself slowly starting to admire? He had to know more. That evening, Logan decided to follow her again. He had promised himself that he wouldn't intrude on her life, that he would respect the boundaries of their cold, contractual marriage. But after that night, he felt something pulling him toward her, something he couldn't quite place. As soon as the workday ended, he made his move. His heart was racing with a mixture of guilt and anticipation as he watched Evelyn walk across the grounds, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if looking for something or someone. He stayed hidden behind a stack of hay bales, his breath shallow, trying not to alert her to his presence. His heart pounded in his chest as he followed her. She walked through the fields, her long hair pulled back in a loose braid, her step quick yet purposeful. Logan noticed the way she moved, with grace, with intention, like someone who knew exactly where she was going. His curiosity was eating him alive. After about 10 minutes, Evelyn came to a small, secluded area near the woods, a place Logan had never seen before. She stopped at a dilapidated shack, its paint peeling and the windows cracked, but she didn't hesitate. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key, unlocking the door. The creak of the hinges echoed in the silence of the evening. Logan's heart raced. He couldn't quite understand why he felt the need to follow her here, why it felt like he had to see what she was doing. He took a cautious step forward, just enough to see through the partially open door. His pulse quickened as he watched her move inside. The shack was small, cluttered, but what caught Logan's attention was the group of women gathered inside. Women who looked cold, worn, and hungry. He could see the faint outlines of children sitting on the floor, some clutching blankets, others huddling close to their mothers. Evelyn immediately went to a wooden table covered in bags and boxes. Logan's breath caught in his throat as she began pulling out food, clothes, and even small toys, handing them out to the women and children. He stood frozen, watching her interact with them. The way she smiled at the children, the way her hands trembled as she handed out the food, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just charity. This was her life. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her voice was warm and full of love, a stark contrast to the reserved woman he had grown accustomed to seeing around the ranch. Evelyn was different here. She wasn't just a farm girl caught in a marriage she didn't want. She was a beacon of hope to these people, the lifeline they desperately needed. Logan watched in silence, his heart swelling with emotion. He felt a knot form in his stomach as guilt and admiration overwhelmed him. Here he was, a man who had everything, wealth, power, comfort, and yet he had never once given so selflessly. He had never once cared about anyone beyond his own ambitions. And Evelyn? She had so little to give, and yet she gave everything. She didn't just share her wealth or her time. She shared herself. She poured her heart into helping these people, these strangers, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. Logan felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, the weight of his own indifference pressing down on him. As he stood there watching her, he realized something else. Evelyn had been living a life of sacrifice for as long as he had known her. Her charity work wasn't a secret she had kept from him because she was ashamed of it. It was because she had no expectation of recognition. She didn't need validation or praise for what she did. She simply did it because it was the right thing to do. Logan took a step back, his mind racing. How had he not seen this before? How had he been so blind to the depth of her character? He had spent so much time viewing their marriage as a transaction, a business arrangement, that he had never stopped to see the woman in front of him, the woman who was so much more than what he had imagined. As Evelyn continued to hand out supplies, Logan watched her closely, a mix of awe and shame swirling in his chest. He had misjudged her, had placed her in a box that was too small to contain the person she truly was, and the guilt of that realization stung deeply. It wasn't until Evelyn finished her work that she turned to leave, locking the door behind her. She didn't notice Logan as she walked back toward the ranch, but Logan didn't follow her this time. He stayed rooted to the spot, his mind swirling with everything he had just seen. He had come to learn about her, but what he had discovered was far more than he had ever expected. As he turned to walk back to the ranch, a weight settled over his heart. The image of Evelyn's face, soft, determined, and full of compassion, stayed with him. It was clear now that she was not the woman he had assumed her to be. She was so much more than that, and he was just beginning to understand the kind of love she had to offer. That night, as Logan lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn's kindness, her strength, and the way she had poured her heart into the lives of others. What did that mean for him? And what did it mean for their marriage? The days following Logan's revelation about Evelyn's charity work weighed heavily on him. Every moment he spent near her now felt different, charged with a growing emotion that he didn't know how to process. He found himself looking at her with a mixture of admiration and guilt. She had shown him a side of herself that he had never expected, and he knew he could never go back to seeing her the way he once had. But there was something else in his heart now, something tender and fragile, something that pulled him toward her, making him yearn to know her, to understand her, to prove that he was more than just the wealthy ranch owner she had been forced to marry. He couldn't help it. He had started to fall in love with her. It was one late afternoon when Logan finally gathered the courage to confess. The ranch was quiet, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows over the land. Evelyn had just finished her chores and Logan found her sitting on the porch, her head bent over a book. The sight of her, so beautiful and serene, made his chest tighten. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just a conversation. It was the beginning of something he had never expected. He had to tell her how he felt. "Evelyn," he began, his voice thick with emotion. She looked up from the book, her eyes locking onto his, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken connection. But still, she didn't speak. "I need to tell you something," he continued, his words coming out slower than he intended. "I've been watching you, and I've been learning more about you than I ever expected to. And the more I learn, the more I realize something." His throat tightened as he fought to keep his composure. "You're not the woman I thought you were. You're so much more, Evelyn. You're kind, selfless, courageous. And I've come to realize that I care for you more than I ever thought possible. I—" He stopped abruptly, noticing the way her face changed. Her expression hardened, just for a brief moment, before it softened again. She lowered her eyes, her fingers tightening around the book in her lap. Logan's heart sank, but he pressed on, desperate to make her understand. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly, the words hanging in the air between them. "And I don't know what to do with this feeling, but I wanted you to know." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked at him, her face unreadable. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Something guarded, something painful. Logan held his breath, waiting for her response. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Logan, how do I know this is real? How do I know that you're not just feeling sorry for me because of what you saw? Because of the way I've been living, helping people with nothing to give. You don't owe me anything. This marriage, it's a business arrangement, nothing more." Her words stung him, and he took a step closer, reaching out to her. "Evelyn, no," he said urgently. "It's not pity. It's not because I feel guilty about what I've done. I'm telling you because I can't ignore it anymore. I don't want to be the man who only sees you as a business deal, as a way to fulfill some kind of obligation. I want to know you, Evelyn. I want to be with you, not out of obligation, but because I care about you, because I love you." Evelyn stood up quickly, backing away slightly. Her face twisted with emotion, her brow furrowed, and her eyes flickered with confusion and hurt. Logan could see it, but he didn't know how to bridge the gap between them. He had never felt so helpless. "I don't know if I can believe that," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know if I can believe that you love me. How could you? I'm just the girl who was sold off to you by my stepmother. How can that be love? How can you love someone who has been nothing but a burden in your life? You married me for business. You never asked for me. You never chose me." Logan's heart broke at the pain in her voice, and before he could speak again, she turned away, retreating into the house. He stood there stunned, his body stiff with the weight of her words. She didn't believe him. How could she? After everything, how could she trust that his feelings were real? Later that evening, after dinner, Logan sat in the study, his mind in turmoil. He could hear the muffled sound of Evelyn moving about in the other room, but he couldn't bring himself to go to her. The pain in her eyes had hit him harder than he expected, and he realized that he had no right to ask for her love without truly earning it. But he couldn't give up. He refused to let her walk away without showing her that he was different now. He had to prove himself, not just to her, but to himself. As if on cue, there was a knock on the door. It was Evelyn's stepmother, and Logan knew this was the moment he had been dreading. The woman entered, her face painted with a smug smile, her eyes flicking over Logan with disdain. "Mr. Hayes," she said sweetly, her tone dripping with fake politeness. "I trust you're enjoying the honeymoon period of your marriage?" She paused, eyeing him. "I just wanted to remind you of the situation you're in. You don't really have much of a choice, do you? I'm sure you know that this marriage was never about love. It's all about business, and Evelyn is just a pawn in that game." Logan's jaw tightened. He stood walking toward her, his hands clenched at his sides. He couldn't believe how cruel she was. "Don't talk about her that way," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "Evelyn is not a pawn. She's a woman who deserves respect, and she's done more for this family than you ever will. You don't get to treat her like this anymore." Her smile faltered for a moment, and Logan could see the rage bubbling beneath her cool exterior. But instead of backing down, she chuckled darkly. "Oh, Logan, you think you're going to change everything, don't you? She's still a farm girl, still a nobody in your eyes, and she always will be." Logan didn't hesitate. "You're wrong. She's not just a farm girl. She's everything, and I'll make sure you never hurt her again." The confrontation left Logan seething with anger and determination. He knew what he had to do now. Evelyn's stepmother had revealed the depth of Evelyn's pain, and Logan wasn't going to let her continue to suffer, not at the hands of anyone, not even her own flesh and blood. He was going to show Evelyn that his feelings were real, and he was going to prove that he was worthy of her love. The next morning, Logan woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. Evelyn's words from the night before had pierced through him like arrows, but they had also sparked something inside of him, a realization that he could no longer live the way he had been. He couldn't continue pretending to be the man he had been before, a man focused only on his business dealings, his image, and his wealth. Evelyn had shown him the meaning of selflessness, the power of compassion, and the strength of a kind heart. And now more than ever, he was determined to change for her, for both of them. Logan had never been one to share his feelings easily, and even though he knew Evelyn was still guarded with him, he wanted to show her that he could be a man worthy of her trust. He wasn't going to just say the words, he was going to prove them with actions. That morning he made the decision. He would secretly fund the charity work that Evelyn was so dedicated to, giving her everything she needed to make a real difference in the lives of the homeless. Women, children, and elderly people she helped every day. He didn't need her to thank him. He didn't need her to know where the money came from. He simply wanted to be the kind of man who could support her in the ways she needed, the ways he had failed to understand before. The first step was to find out where her greatest needs lay. Logan knew the shelter she worked with was run down, and Evelyn had often mentioned that they lacked enough food and supplies. But it wasn't just about the physical needs. He wanted to help create a place where these women could feel safe, valued, and cared for. He needed to do more than simply throw money at the problem. He needed to change the whole system that had failed them in the first place. Later that day, Logan went to the local shelter Evelyn had worked with. He spoke to the manager, an older woman named Clara, who was incredibly grateful for any help she could get, though she had no idea who Logan truly was. After a lengthy conversation, he came up with a plan to renovate the shelter, revamp its operations, and provide enough resources so that the women and children there would not just survive, but thrive. Clara was overwhelmed with gratitude and promised to keep everything under wraps. Logan didn't stop there. He also arranged for a supply of food to be delivered each week, provided clothing and hygiene products for those in need, and even set up a training program to help women at the shelter learn skills that could help them find better-paying jobs. He was secretly making life easier for them all, though he wasn't sure if Evelyn would ever know who was behind it. The more Logan worked behind the scenes, the more his admiration for Evelyn grew. He saw firsthand the impact she had on these women. Despite having so little herself, she was their light, their beacon of hope. She never asked for anything in return, and yet she gave everything of herself to make the world a better place. One evening, after another long day of work on the ranch, Logan found Evelyn sitting on the porch. The evening was cool, and the faint glow of twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and pink. Logan stepped out of the door, quietly walking up behind her. He had something he wanted to tell her, but words still felt like an insufficient way to express what was in his heart. "Evelyn," he began softly, and she turned, her face lighting up at the sound of his voice. "Logan," she said with a small, polite smile, her eyes still hesitant. Logan didn't wait for her to speak any further. "I want to tell you something," he said, sitting down beside her. "I've been thinking a lot lately about you, about everything, and I've come to realize that I've treated you like a business transaction when I should have been treating you like a person. You're so much more than that, and I want to make things right. I don't want to be the man who only sees the world through the lens of his wealth. I want to be the man who sees the people in it and sees them for who they are, just like you've shown me." Evelyn blinked, unsure of where this conversation was heading. She'd heard similar words before, but they never rang true. The past few months had proven to her that Logan had only married her out of obligation, not love. She didn't know how to respond, so she just remained silent. Logan took a deep breath, knowing this wouldn't be enough to convince her. She needed time, but he needed to prove that he had changed. "I've been doing something I hope will show you that I care. I've been working behind the scenes to help the charity you've been dedicating so much of your life to. I've spoken with the shelter manager, and we've come up with a plan to renovate it, provide better resources, and give the women there a real chance at a better life. You won't have to worry about where the next meal is coming from, or if the shelter is going to be cold tonight. I want you to have the freedom to keep doing what you're doing, without the burden of having to struggle." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea that Logan was involved in any of this. She had known there was something different about the way the shelter had been improving recently, but she hadn't connected the dots. "Logan, you've been doing all this for them?" she asked, her voice soft and filled with disbelief. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "but not just for them. For you. I know I've failed to show you the kind of respect you deserve, and I want to change that. I want to support you in the way you've always supported others." Evelyn turned her head, trying to hide the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. She hadn't expected this from Logan. She hadn't expected him to be the one to help make her dreams come true. She thought he would always see her as nothing more than a farm girl, someone beneath him. But in this moment, she saw something different in his eyes. Something genuine. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," Logan said softly, reaching for her hand. "I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere. And in that moment, Evelyn felt the walls she had built around her begin to crack. Maybe there was more to their marriage than just obligation. Maybe there was a chance for something real. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. The night was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. The ranch had settled into a peaceful stillness, and the sky above was a velvet canvas of stars, each one twinkling with a kind of magic that felt almost too beautiful to be real. It was a perfect night, a night that seemed to echo the change that had begun between them, between Logan and Evelyn. They were sitting on the porch again, the space between them filled with a silence that was no longer uncomfortable, but instead filled with anticipation. Evelyn had noticed that Logan was different in the past few weeks, his kindness more genuine, his eyes more open to her. She could no longer deny the connection they had, but she couldn't help but feel unsure. Was this truly love, or was it just a man trying to atone for his past mistakes? Logan, sensing her hesitance, took a deep breath, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. He could no longer hide behind actions. It was time for him to speak the words that had been in his heart for so long. "Evelyn," he said, his voice soft but filled with an intensity she hadn't heard before. "I can't keep pretending. Not anymore. What I feel for you, it's real. I know I've hurt you, and I know I've let you down in ways that can never be undone. But what I also know is that I love you." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She had known that Logan had been different, that he had changed in ways that were hard to understand. But hearing him say those words, hearing him admit the one thing she had feared would never happen, took her by surprise. "You love me?" she whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned to face him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Logan nodded, his blue eyes filled with sincerity. "Yes, I love you. I've loved you for a while, but I didn't know how to show you. I didn't know how to be the man you needed, the man who could make you believe that I could be worth your trust. But I know now that love isn't about grand gestures or fixing mistakes. It's about being there, truly being there, for the person you care about. And I want to be there for you, Evelyn, in every way possible." Evelyn's heart swelled with emotion, a whirlwind of feelings swirling inside her. She had spent so long closing herself off, afraid of being hurt, afraid of being seen as weak. But here in front of her was Logan, a man who had once treated her like a business deal, now pouring out his heart in a way she never could have imagined. Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached out to him, her voice shaking. "Logan, I don't know what to say. I never thought I would hear those words from you. I never thought you would see me, really see me. For so long, I believed I was nothing more than a tool to help you, just another part of the business." Logan's heart ached at the pain in her voice, at the rawness of her words. He reached out and gently took her hands in his touch tender and reassuring. "You are so much more than that," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You are kind and strong and brave in ways I never even understood. I can't change the past, Evelyn, but I can promise you this. I will never stop trying to make things right. I will never stop loving you, even if it takes a lifetime." Evelyn's tears began to fall, her heart breaking open as she felt the weight of his words. She had been afraid to love, afraid to trust, but in this moment, she felt something shift deep inside of her. She realized that Logan wasn't just apologizing. He wasn't just trying to fix things for her. He was offering her his heart, his love, his future. And for the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness. Logan gently cupped her face in his hands, tilting her chin up so that she was looking directly into his eyes. "I don't want to waste another moment of my life without you in it," he whispered, his voice low and tender. "I want to spend every day showing you how much you mean to me, how much I need you." Evelyn's heart swelled with warmth, and the walls she had built around herself, the ones that had kept her safe from pain, came crumbling down. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just saying the words. He meant them. I, I think I love you too," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. It was the first time she had ever said it, the first time she had ever allowed herself to admit it, and yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Logan's eyes sparkled with joy as he leaned in, his lips brushing gently against hers. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, as though they were both savoring the moment, afraid that if they rushed it, they might lose something precious. But then, as the kiss deepened, all of their fears, doubts, and insecurities melted away. It was a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through, the pain, the healing, the growing love. When they finally pulled away, both of them breathless and wide-eyed, Evelyn rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I would find this kind of love," she murmured, "but now that I've found it, I don't want to let it go." Logan held her tighter, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "You don't have to let it go, Evelyn. This is just the beginning." As they sat there wrapped in each other's arms under the endless sky, they both knew that their love had come at the most unexpected of times. But it was real, and it was theirs to cherish. For the first time, Evelyn truly believed that love could heal, that love could save them both. And as the stars above twinkled down on them, it was clear to both of them that they had found something worth fighting for, something worth holding on to for the rest of their lives. The community center was a beacon of hope in a town that had long struggled with poverty and neglect. As Evelyn and Logan walked through the front doors of what had once been a dilapidated building, now transformed into a bright and welcoming space, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was their dream, a dream that had come alive through hard work, love, and the desire to make a difference in the world. It wasn't just a center for homeless women and children. It was a place of renewal where lives could be rebuilt, where dignity could be restored. The walls were lined with donations, clothes, toys, food, all carefully organized by the hands of volunteers, many of whom had come from the same hardships that the center aimed to alleviate. The warm smell of fresh bread filled the air, courtesy of a new baking program that helped women learn skills to support themselves. Logan stood beside Evelyn, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, a proud smile on his face. This was the life they had built together. This was the future they had created, not with money, but with heart. And it was a future that neither of them could have imagined on the day they first met. Evelyn had come a long way from the farm girl who had once been forced into an unwanted marriage. The woman standing beside him now was strong, confident, and filled with a purpose that reached beyond herself. She had shown him what it meant to truly live, to care for others, and to find fulfillment in giving rather than receiving. And in return, Logan had given her the love and respect she deserved, learning along the way that true wealth lay not in material things, but in the connections we make and the lives we touch. They stood together, looking out at the women and children who were already beginning to make the community center their home. Some were sitting at tables, writing resumes. Others were playing with their children, their faces lighting up with the kind of joy that only comes when you know that you are safe, cared for, and valued. Logan squeezed Evelyn's hand, his voice filled with emotion. "We've come so far," he said softly. "I never could have imagined that this would be the result of our journey. This is what matters." Evelyn nodded, her heart full. "I think we've learned something important along the way. It's not about the money or the things you can buy or the status you achieve. It's about what you give, what you offer to others. That's what defines you." Her words echoed in the quiet of the center, and as she looked around, she realized just how true they were. Logan had helped her open this place, using his resources not to build an empire for himself, but to create a legacy of kindness. They hadn't needed anything more than love and the willingness to make a difference. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow through the windows, Evelyn stood before a group of volunteers and the women who had found shelter in the center. They had gathered for a ceremony, a small but meaningful event where she would share her message with the world. Logan stood beside her, his presence as steady and comforting as always. "This is our future," he said to the crowd. "This is what we've worked for. Not for wealth, not for recognition, but to make the world a better place, to remind each of you that you are valuable, you are loved, and you are capable of so much more than you may ever have realized." Evelyn took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice clear and strong as she spoke to the gathered crowd. "I've been where you are," she began, her eyes scanning the room, meeting the gazes of the women who had come seeking refuge. "I know what it feels like to feel invisible, to feel like you don't matter. But I'm here to tell you that you do. You are worth more than you can possibly imagine. And the journey you're on right now is just the beginning of something incredible." She paused, her heart swelling with emotion as she looked at Logan, the man who had shown her that love was not about grand gestures, but about the quiet, everyday acts of kindness. This is not just a place for shelter. This is a place where you can find your strength, your voice, your purpose. And it's not just about receiving, it's about giving. It's about finding that part of you that can offer something to the world, no matter how small it may seem. Because in the end, it's not what you have, but what you give that defines you. The room was silent for a moment, and then a ripple of applause began. The women clapped, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply nodding in understanding. The message had resonated. Evelyn had spoken not just to them, but to herself as well. It was a message of hope, of strength, and of the transformative power of kindness. As the applause died down, Logan stepped forward and kissed Evelyn on the cheek, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done more than I could have ever imagined," he whispered. "You've changed lives. You've changed mine." Evelyn smiled up at him, her heart full. "We've done it together." And in that moment, they both knew that the love they had found, the love that had grown from something uncertain and fragile into something deep and unshakable, was the foundation of everything they had built. It wasn't the wealth, the ranch, or the status that mattered. It was the love they had shared, the kindness they had given, and the difference they had made in the lives of others. As the evening sky darkened and the stars began to appear once more, Evelyn and Logan stood hand in hand, watching the people around them begin to rebuild their lives. They had found something that would last far beyond their time on this earth, a legacy of love, kindness, and giving. And in their hearts, they knew that they had found the true meaning of wealth, not in gold or property, but in the lives they had touched and the love they had shared.